Hello, I've been supervising PhD students in archaeology here at University of Toronto for more than 30 years now, and I've seen some of those students get through the program fairly painlessly and quickly, while others have floundered quite a bit and sometimes taken 9 or 10 years even to get through. And with this video, I'd like to begin a few videos that are effectively on professional development in archaeology for graduate students, beginning with one that provides my tips on how you can get through a PhD thesis relatively quickly and as painlessly as possible.
Writing a PhD thesis is not just a matter of parking yourself in front of a keyboard and typing things that come out of your brain. To finish your thesis quickly and to your satisfaction, you need to develop some habits and strategies. The ones I'm going to discuss here involve establishing a realistic scope, setting deadlines and routines, engaging with your supervisor, and having a strategy for the structure of your thesis. One of the most common mistakes among PhD students is to pick a topic that's too broad or too ambitious. After doing some exploratory research on your topic, narrow it down to an aspect or a couple of aspects that you can reasonably manage in a fairly short period of time. For example, break your project on an entire region in a particular time period into a comparison of just a few of the most revealing sites, or perhaps comparing two subregions against one another. Or focus only on economic aspects, or on the technology of a particular tool type. The point is to focus on a project that you can complete convincingly and thoroughly within just a couple of years. A PhD project can drag on indefinitely unless you set for yourself very firm deadlines. Whether you use an old-school daytimer or a digital calendar, you need to decide what dates are reasonable for you to complete certain benchmarks of your thesis, such as drafts of chapters or graphics. But you can also include such things as meetings with your supervisor to discuss your recent progress, or conferences where you'll present preliminary results of your research. Just like working out at a gym, to make sure that you don't let your thesis languish for weeks on end, it really pays to have a regular routine. Whether your routine is to write for at least 15 minutes every morning while you sip your morning coffee, or for 4 hours every second day, the important thing is to stick to that routine, deviating from it only under very exceptional circumstances. However, your routine should also build in time for rest and relaxation with friends or family. All work and no play not only makes you a dull PhD student, it also leads to burnout. Scheduling both work and downtime helps you strike the right balance. And even if there are some days when you decide what you've just written is total garbage, making you hit the delete key, the important thing is that you've developed the habit of writing regularly. And even on days when you're feeling totally uninspired, you can always work on a graphic or perhaps on your bibliography. An important part of your routine should be to have regular meetings with your supervisor. These meetings aren't necessarily weekly, but it's important at least to have meetings following each benchmark along the way, such as the completion of a chapter draft. And don't wait for your supervisor to initiate a meeting. It's really your responsibility to approach your supervisor and find out about your supervisor's availability. Supervisors are busy people, but they're highly likely to cooperate if you show some initiative about scheduling meetings. And come to the meeting prepared to show the supervisor your latest results. That could even include a brief presentation. But at the very least, it should include a one-page executive summary of what you've accomplished since the last meeting. Of course, these meetings are also a good time for you to bring up problems that you've been encountering, to get your supervisor's suggestions about how to solve them. Having said that, it's a good idea to show that you've already thought about some of the potential solutions yourself, and to focus on research-related problems that you can reasonably expect your supervisor to help you with. When it comes to actually writing your thesis, there are a number of tools and strategies that you can use to make the process a lot easier and more efficient. Before you do any writing at all, try to characterize your topic. Are you trying to compare two things, like 2 assemblages, or 2 sites, or 2 regions, or 2 time periods? Or are you trying to test a particular hypothesis? Are you trying to identify the cause of some phenomenon, such as a site abandonment? Are you just trying to fill the gaps in our knowledge about an understudied region? Or are you attempting to challenge some conventional wisdom that dominates in the literature? Or are you developing some new method and demonstrating how to apply it in a particular archaeological context? All of these approaches have different logical structures, and consequently, which one you choose will affect the organization of your thesis. Deciding on one of these strategies also helps you identify your research questions and the tools you might use to help solve them. After deciding on your overall strategy, there are a number of specific strategies you can use to make your writing process go quickly. One strategy that some students find helpful is to let graphics help them tell a story. Instead of writing a whole lot of text and then selecting some graphics to illustrate it, you turn the process around. You start by selecting some key graphics, perhaps ones you've previously used in a conference presentation, or ones that are generated by some statistical analysis. Once you've organized these graphics in some sensible order that helps you tell a story, you begin writing about each of the graphics in turn. Essentially, you just describe to your reader what's going on in the graphic and why you think it's important. Before you know it, you've completed substantial parts of your analysis and discussion sections. One of the most useful tools when you're writing your thesis is an outline. You can find proprietary task management or outlining software, but it's really not necessary to use something like that. Instead, your outline could simply be a point form list of how you plan your chapters, like the short one you see here. And you can add or subtract things or move them around as you develop your ideas more fully. This helps you ensure that you have a good flow of ideas and information, and reminds you when you have to add something to set the stage for something that comes later. A very simple outline, like the one you see here, can also be the basis for making chapter templates, which I find to be the easiest way to use outlining in your writing. I strongly recommend that you make a blank chapter template before you do any substantial writing. You just set up this template in your word processor, and here I'll demonstrate it using Microsoft Word. Probably, most of you would begin by opening a blank document in Word. But the default blank document has several undesirable characteristics. A potentially very useful feature here is the style gallery that you see here. But the trouble is that Microsoft defaults to a set of styles that are effectively useless. For example, one of the styles here is title. But how often do you use a title in your chapter? Exactly once. It's very simple to have title included in your template without having to have it in the quick style gallery. Some of the other defaults are even more ridiculous, such as emphasis, subtle emphasis, intense emphasis, and book title. How often do you need a book title? Surely none of these are styles that you'd be using so often that you need to have quick access to them. The whole purpose of the style gallery is to give you quick access to the styles that you're going to use most often, and these ones sure ain't it. So you should delete them and replace them with ones that you'll find more useful. I'm not aware of any way to delete them en masse, so I delete them one by one. That involves control-clicking on each of the unwanted styles and then selecting Remove from Style Gallery. The only ones I'm keeping here are body text and 2 or 3 levels of headings, and I'll next make sure that these ones are described the way I want them, as well as to add some new styles to the style gallery that I use fairly often. With some text selected, I'll next select Style from the Format menu, select or type one of the more useful style names, and then click on Modify. I then edit each of the remaining styles either to fit my personal preferences, or to fit the style of a journal where I want to publish something, or to fit the style that's required by the School of Graduate Studies. Notice at lower left the option to include the style in the style gallery. You should make sure this option is checked for all those styles you use regularly in your chapters, and that it's unchecked for all those that you use very rarely or not at all. In this chapter template, we'll use dummy text to mark the places of all the various elements that we'll use in the chapter, such as the chapter title, the subheadings, body text, block quotes, captions, and anything else we think we might need to use regularly. I'll speed some of this up, but note that the style for block quotation defaults to one that has a blue box around its perimeter. It also changes and italicizes the font. I don't like those defaults, so I'll get rid of them. For the purposes of this demonstration, I'll also include a bibliography style at the end of the template. But for many of you, your bibliography would be in a separate section at the end of the thesis and would have its own file, so you wouldn't need to have a bibliography style in your chapter template. By now you've noticed that making all these style changes takes time. That's why it's important to get them all over with while making a template instead of having to do them independently for each chapter. I don't need to belabor all these style changes here, but once we've dummied up all the headings, subheadings, body text, block quotes, captions, and styles that we want to use in each chapter, we might end up with a file that looks something like this. Most of the elements also have styles that appear in the style gallery, or quick style list, but you'll note that we don't need to include the chapter title in the style gallery, because it only appears once, and we just place it there with a dummy title. Then, we can save it, either as a template or as a dummy chapter that we'd simply copy for each of the chapters of our thesis. Once your blank template is set up, all you have to do is open it and save a different version of it, one for each chapter. This copy will be for Chapter 3 on the methods. And then save it as Chapter 3. And we can start establishing some further headings based on our outline. Most of the points in your outline will either be in second-level headings or in body text, and each of the body text ones will become the beginning of a new paragraph. Later, when you're working on your chapter, you'll just select one of those points and expand on it to create the paragraph. Another way to outline your thesis is to use flowcharts. You might find this approach to outlining more effective if you tend to be visually oriented, but it does pretty much the same things as you've seen in the previous parts of this video. Rarely does anyone write a thesis by beginning with Chapter 1 and then progressing to Chapter 2, Chapter 3, and so on. Instead, it makes a lot more sense to write non-linearly. What I mean by that is using your outline to pick a place that you feel inspired to write about and then begin writing on that topic. For example, let's say your routine is to write for at least 15 minutes every morning while you're having your morning coffee. After taking a couple of sips, you turn on your computer and open the file that shows your outline. Then you scan your outline, and perhaps today you feel like talking about your theoretical perspectives for your background chapter. Or perhaps you're in the mood to discuss your statistical methods in the methods chapter. If you're feeling particularly uninspired, perhaps you'll just work on bibliography or on editing and correcting typos, like this mess I made out of the word statistical. Once you've decided, you turn to the relevant chapter file, where you've already used your outline to establish headings and beginnings of paragraphs. Turn to the relevant section and begin filling in details that the outline calls for. At this stage, you don't need to worry too much about typos or having to italicize Latin terms, because you can always go back and fix those later. If you run out of ideas about what to write in that section, or an idea suddenly occurs to you that's relevant to a different section, just shift to that section and begin writing there. You may soon find yourself on a roll. In that case, you may want to use placeholders to mark where you want to add references later on. I sometimes use XXX because it's easy to search on. That way, you don't have to let looking up references interrupt your flow of ideas. Although, if you use a citation tool like RefWorks or EndNote, it may not take you too much time to add the reference directly. If you use this outline-based, nonlinear writing technique, you'll be amazed at how much writing you can get done each week. There's an old saying, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. Yet I find a lot of students get hung up because they're afraid to send me chapters because they don't think they're polished enough. Newsflash, you're not writing medieval manuscripts, and all writers, no matter how good they are, go through all kinds of revisions. You should let your supervisor, as well as friends and colleagues, help you fine-tune your arguments and improve your writing. My own students soon get used to seeing manuscripts come back to them all marked up. You should not view this as somehow evidence of failure. It's just a normal part of the research and writing process. Another important aspect of getting your PhD thesis written quickly is commitment. You need to stick to your schedule and your routines, and make sure that you've allocated enough time in that schedule to get your tasks completed on time and without excuses. Don't take up so much teaching or TA work that it leaves you little time to work on your thesis. And see if you can get grading TA-ships, where the grading work is concentrated in short periods of time. And you should resist the temptation to take on lots of fieldwork opportunities, even when those are paid positions in CRM or contract archaeology. Sure, grad school's expensive, but it doesn't make sense to prolong that economic precarity by postponing your thesis to take on extra work. Finally, not only build breaks into your routine, but take the time to celebrate milestones, such as finishing a chapter draft or submitting your thesis to your supervisor and committee, or presenting some of your work at a conference. Marking these milestones and rewarding yourself in some way will help you realize how much you've accomplished, so you won't feel like you're stuck in a rut.
Well, I hope you found some of those tips helpful. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I do plan to follow up with a few more videos on different aspects of professional development in archaeology, including such things as how to give an effective conference presentation, which is very important in terms of networking and trying to improve your future job prospects. If you'd like to be informed when I produce new videos, please click on the subscribe button down below. Thank you, and stay safe.
It took me forever to learn how to ride a bike. After years of trying